The scream cut through the howling wind like a knife, but no one in Fort Garland heard it except the man who had been tracking the woman's footprints for the past 3 hours. Quinn Sawyer pressed his gloved hand against his horse's neck, feeling the animal's exhaustion through the thick winter coat, and knew they were getting close. The blizzard had swept down from the Sangre de Cristo Mountains without warning that February afternoon in 1878, transforming the Colorado landscape into a deadly white maze. And somewhere out here was a woman who had maybe an hour left before the cold claimed her for good. He had been in the general store when Mrs. Peterson came running in, her face pale as fresh snow, talking about how the new schoolteacher had gone out to visit the Morrison ranch earlier that morning and never came back. The Morrisons lived 15 miles outside of town, and with the storm that had rolled in around noon, anyone caught between there and Fort Garland would be in serious trouble. Most of the men in town had shaken their heads and said they would wait until the storm passed, that searching in this weather was suicide. But Quinn had looked out at the white curtain descending over the world and knew that waiting meant finding a frozen corpse come morning. His father had been a trapper before settling down to ranch, and he had taught Quinn how to read the land like other men read books. Even with the snow falling thick and fast, Quinn could see the subtle depressions where someone had walked, the way the wind patterns shifted around obstacles, the signs that most people would miss. The trail had led him northeast from town, which made sense if the schoolteacher had gotten disoriented in the whiteout. People did that, turned themselves around without realizing it, and walked in the wrong direction with complete confidence. The horse stumbled, and Quinn dismounted, knowing the animal could not carry him much farther in these drifts. He grabbed the blankets from his saddlebag and draped one over the horse's back, then tied the reins to a sturdy pine tree that offered some shelter from the wind. The tracks were fresher here, and he could see where the woman had fallen, gotten up, fallen again. His heart hammered against his ribs as he pushed forward on foot, his eyes scanning the white landscape for any hint of color, any shape that did not belong. Then he saw her, a dark form collapsed against a boulder 20 yards ahead, already half buried by the driving snow. Quinn ran, his boots sinking deep with each step, and dropped to his knees beside her. She was still breathing. He could see the faint fog from her mouth, but her lips were blue and her eyes were closed. Her coat was too thin for this weather, and her gloves were soaked through. He pulled off his own heavy fur-lined coat and wrapped it around her, then lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, or maybe adrenaline was giving him strength he did not normally possess. "Can you hear me?" he said, his mouth close to her ear. "You are going to be all right. I have got you." Her eyelids fluttered, and he saw brown eyes, dark as coffee, staring up at him with confusion and fear. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Frost clung to her dark hair where it had escaped from under her bonnet, and her face was so pale it frightened him. "Do not try to talk," Quinn said, already moving back toward where he had left his horse. "Save your strength. We need to get you warm." He knew they could not make it back to town, not in this storm and not with her in this condition. But there was an old hunting cabin about 2 miles west, if he could find it in the blizzard. His father had taken him there when he was a boy, teaching him how to track elk through these mountains. The cabin had a fireplace and 4 walls, and right now that was the difference between life and death. The woman made a small sound, almost a whimper, and tried to curl against his chest. He held her tighter, talking to her as he walked, telling her about the cabin, about the fire he would build, about the hot coffee they would have once they were safe. He did not know if she could understand him, but he kept talking anyway, because silence felt like giving up. Finding his horse again in the storm was harder than he had expected, and for a moment, panic touched his spine with icy fingers. But then he saw the dark shape of the animal against the tree, and relief flooded through him. He could not carry the woman and all his supplies, so he untied the horse and led it with one hand while cradling her against his chest with his other arm. The horse followed reluctantly, head down against the wind. The cabin appeared out of the snow like a miracle, its low roof barely visible until Quinn was almost on top of it. He kicked the door open and carried the woman inside, laying her gently on the floor while he went back out for his horse. He led the animal into the small attached lean-to that had once served as a stable, then grabbed his saddlebags and the bedroll and hurried back inside. The cabin was freezing, but at least it blocked the wind. Quinn worked fast, building a fire in the stone fireplace with the dry wood that someone had left stacked in the corner. His hands shook as he struck the flint, and he had to try 3 times before the kindling caught. But then the flames began to lick upward, and warmth started to seep into the small space. He turned back to the woman and saw that she was shaking violently, her whole body convulsing with shivers. That was actually a good sign, he told himself. It meant her body was still fighting. He pulled off her wet coat and her soaked boots, then wrapped her in every blanket he had. He filled his small pot with snow and set it near the fire to melt, knowing she would need water soon. "What is your name?" he asked, rubbing her hands between his own, trying to restore circulation. "Can you tell me your name?" Her teeth chattered so hard she could barely speak, but she managed to whisper, "Hannah. Hannah Olson." "Well, Miss Olson, I am Quinn Sawyer, and you gave everyone in Fort Garland quite a scare today." He kept rubbing her hands, then moved to her feet, massaging them through her wet stockings. Her toes were white, and he prayed they were not frostbitten beyond recovery. "I got lost," she said, her voice so quiet he had to lean close to hear her. "The storm came so fast, I could not see anything." "I know. These mountain storms are like that, but you are safe now." She looked up at him with those dark eyes, and he saw intelligence there and something else. Fear, yes, but also a kind of fierce determination. This was a woman who had fought to survive, who had kept walking even when her body wanted to give up. "You came for me," she said. "Into the storm." Quinn shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her voice. "Could not very well leave you out there." "The others did. I heard Mrs. Peterson in the store before I left. She said if the storm came in, I should stay at the Morrison ranch until it passed. But the Morrisons were not home when I got there. I waited, but they never came, and I thought I could make it back before the weather turned." "The Morrisons went to their daughter's place in Alamosa 2 days ago," Quinn said. "I guess word did not reach you." Hannah closed her eyes, and he saw a tear slip down her cheek. "I almost died because I did not know they were gone." "But you did not die," Quinn said firmly. "You are here, and you are warming up, and come morning we will get you back to town." He heated water and made coffee with the supplies from his saddlebags, then helped her sit up enough to drink. She sipped slowly, wincing as the hot liquid hit her throat, but color was starting to return to her cheeks. The fire crackled and popped, filling the cabin with dancing light and welcome heat. "How long have you been in Fort Garland?" Quinn asked, settling onto the floor beside her with his own cup of coffee. 3 weeks, Hannah said. "I came from Philadelphia to teach at the school. It sounded like an adventure when I read the advertisement. Travel west, help educate the children on the frontier, be part of building something new." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I did not realize how different everything would be, how dangerous." "Philadelphia," Quinn repeated, trying to imagine what that must be like. He had never been further east than Kansas City. "That is a long way to come." "I needed to get away," Hannah said, and something in her voice told him there was a story there, something painful. but she did not elaborate and he did not push. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. The wind shrieked around the cabin's corners, and snow hissed against the single window. Inside, the fire cast their shadows large and strange on the log walls, and Quinn found himself acutely aware of how alone they were, how isolated from the rest of the world. "Tell me about Fort Garland," Hannah said suddenly. "I have been so busy with the school that I have not really gotten to know the town or the people." So Quinn told her about the settlement that had grown up around the old military fort, about how his father had come here in the 1860s to raise cattle and had built a ranch that now ran 500 head. He told her about the silver mine that had opened up in the mountains last year, bringing an influx of miners and the businesses that followed them. He talked about the Martinez family who ran the cantina, about old Doc Wilson who had trained as a surgeon during the war, about the Presbyterian church that met in the schoolhouse on Sundays until they could raise enough money to build their own building. Hannah listened, asking questions, and gradually her shivering subsided. She pushed herself up into a sitting position, keeping the blankets wrapped tight around her shoulders, and Quinn could see her studying him in the firelight. He wondered what she saw. He was 24 years old, tall and rangy from years of working cattle, with sun-weathered skin and dark blonde hair that he kept cut short. His mother had always said he had kind eyes, but he had never been particularly good at seeing himself the way others did. "You saved my life," Hannah said quietly. "I do not know how to thank you for that. No thanks needed. Anyone would have done the same." "But they did not," she pointed out. "Everyone else stayed in town. You were the only one who came out in the storm." Quinn felt heat in his face that had nothing to do with the fire. "I had the skills to track in this weather. My father taught me. Still, you risked yourself for a stranger." Hannah looked down at her hands, which were wrapped around the warm coffee cup. "That means something." The storm continued through the night, and they took turns feeding the fire and keeping watch. Quinn insisted that Hannah sleep while he stayed awake, but she was too restless, too shaken by her near-death experience. Instead, they talked, their voices low and intimate in the small cabin. Hannah told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about her father who had been a clerk and her mother who had died when Hannah was 15. She spoke carefully about a man named Charles who had courted her back east, and Quinn heard the pain in her voice when she mentioned how that had ended. "He chose someone else," she said finally. "Someone with a larger dowry and better family connections. I thought we had an understanding, but I was foolish. So when I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Colorado, I applied. My father was furious, but I could not stay there, not in that city where I would see Charles and his new wife at every social function." "His loss," Quinn said, and meant it. In the few hours he had known Hannah Olson, he had seen courage and strength and intelligence. Any man who would pass that over for money was a fool. She looked at him, surprised, and then smiled. It transformed her face, making her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with regular features and everything to do with the spirit shining through. "Thank you for saying that." As dawn broke, the storm finally began to ease. The wind died down to a whisper, and the snow that had been driving horizontally now fell straight and soft. Quinn went outside to check on his horse and found the animal standing placidly in the lean-to, apparently none the worse for the experience. He gave the horse some grain from his supplies and fresh water melted from snow, then went back inside to find Hannah standing by the window, looking out at the transformed landscape. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "Everything is so white and clean." "Beautiful and deadly," Quinn said, coming to stand beside her. "We need to head back as soon as possible before another storm rolls in." Will your horse be able to carry both of us for a few miles? We will take it slow." He looked at her, assessing. "How do you feel? Can you walk if you need to?" Hannah flexed her feet, testing them. "I think so. They are sore, but nothing seems frostbitten." "You were lucky. Another hour out there and you would have lost toes at least." They prepared to leave, banking the fire and tidying the cabin as best they could. Quinn made sure Hannah wore his heavy coat, and he fashioned a scarf from one of the blankets to protect her face from the cold. She protested that he would freeze, but he insisted, and finally she gave in. The journey back to Fort Garland took most of the morning. The horse struggled through the deep snow, and often Quinn had to lead it on foot, breaking trail while Hannah rode. The sun came out, bright and blinding on the white expanse, and the temperature began to rise slightly. They stopped once to rest and eat some of the jerky and hardtack Quinn carried in his saddlebags, sitting side by side on a fallen log while the horse cropped at some exposed grass. "I was so frightened," Hannah admitted, staring out at the mountains. "When I realized I was lost, and the snow was getting deeper, and I could not see more than a few feet in any direction. I kept thinking about everything I would never get to do, everyone I would never see again. It made me realize how much of my life I have spent being afraid, playing it safe." "Coming west took courage," Quinn said. "That was not playing it safe. Maybe, or maybe I was just running away." She turned to look at him. "Thank you for not letting me die out here, Quinn, for giving me a chance to figure out what I want my life to be." Something in the way she said his name made his heart beat faster. He cleared his throat and stood up. "We should keep moving. Town is still a few miles away." When Fort Garland finally came into view, a small cluster of buildings in a valley between snow-covered hills, Quinn felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief that Hannah would soon be safe and warm and cared for properly. Disappointment that their time alone together was ending. The town erupted when they rode in. Mrs. Peterson came running from the boarding house where Hannah lived, crying and exclaiming. Doc Wilson hurried over to check Hannah for injuries. The few men who were out on the street gathered around, asking questions and slapping Quinn on the back. Someone took his horse to the livery, and someone else ushered Hannah toward the boarding house. And suddenly, Quinn found himself standing alone in the street, watching her disappear into the building. His father found him there a few minutes later. James Sawyer was a big man, weathered and tough, with gray in his beard and lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun. "Heard you went out in the storm," he said. "That was damn foolish, boy. She would have died. Maybe, and you could have died too." But his father's hand was gentle on Quinn's shoulder. "I am proud of you, though. That was a brave thing you did." Quinn went home to the ranch, cleaned up, and tried to settle back into his normal routine. But he found his thoughts constantly drifting to Hannah, wondering how she was recovering, whether her feet were healing properly, if she was warm enough at the boarding house. He told himself he was just concerned for someone he had helped, but he knew it was more than that. 3 days after the storm, he rode back into town with the excuse of picking up supplies. He stopped at the boarding house and asked Mrs. Peterson if Miss Olson was receiving visitors. "Oh, she has been asking about you," the older woman said with a knowing smile. "Go right on up. Second door on the left." Quinn climbed the narrow stairs, his heart hammering, and knocked on the door. He heard Hannah's voice call out, "Come in," and he pushed the door open. She was sitting in a chair by the window, her feet propped up on a small stool, wrapped in bandages. A book lay open in her lap. When she saw him, her face lit up with genuine pleasure, and Quinn felt something in his chest tighten. "Quinn," she said, "I hoped you would come. I wanted to see how you were doing, make sure you were healing properly. Doc Wilson says I was very fortunate. Some bruising and minor frostbite, but nothing permanent." She gestured to another chair. "Please sit. I have been going crazy cooped up in here." He sat, his hat in his hands, suddenly unsure what to say. In the cabin during the storm, conversation had flowed easily. But here, in this proper room with the afternoon light streaming through the window, he felt awkward and out of place. "I cannot stop thinking about that night," Hannah said, saving him from his silence. "About everything that happened, everything we talked about. It felt like, I do not know, like something important. Does that make sense?" "Yes," Quinn said quietly. "It felt that way to me too." They looked at each other, and the air between them seemed charged with possibility. Hannah set her book aside and leaned forward slightly. "The thing is," she said, "I came to Fort Garland to start over, to build a new life. But I had not really thought about what that meant. I just knew I needed to leave Philadelphia and everything that reminded me of my failures. But being out there in that storm, thinking I was going to die, it made me realize something. I do not want to spend my life running away. I want to run towards something, towards someone." Quinn's mouth went dry. "Hannah, I know it is too soon," she said quickly. "I know we barely know each other. But I also know that what I felt that night, the connection between us, that was real. And I think you felt it too." "I did," he admitted. "I do. But you just got here. You have a whole life ahead of you, and you should not tie yourself down to the first person who shows you kindness." "Is that what you think this is? Gratitude?" Hannah shook her head. "I have been grateful to people before, Quinn. This is different. When I look at you, I see someone who matches me somehow. Someone who understands what it means to choose the harder path because it is the right one." He wanted to go to her to take her hands in his, but he forced himself to stay seated. "I am just a rancher's son. I have never been east of Kansas City. I do not read books or go to fancy parties. What would we even have in common?" "Everything that matters," Hannah said simply. "Courage. Honesty. The ability to see what needs doing and do it. Those things are not common, Quinn. They are rare." Over the following weeks, as winter slowly gave way to early spring, Quinn found excuses to come to town often. He would stop by the boarding house to check on Hannah's recovery, and they would sit together in the parlor, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about the books she loved, and he found himself going to the small lending library the town maintained to borrow the volumes she recommended. He told her about the ranch, about working cattle and breaking horses and fixing fences, and she listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was really trying to understand his world. When Doc Wilson cleared Hannah to return to teaching, Quinn drove her to the schoolhouse in his wagon the first morning, wanting to make sure she did not overdo it. He watched her walk into the small building with its bell tower and felt a fierce protective pride. This woman had nearly died in the wilderness, and here she was, returning to her life with determination and grace. The children loved her, he heard from people around town. She was patient and kind, but also expected them to work hard, and she had a gift for making even the most reluctant students interested in learning. Quinn was not surprised. Hannah had that effect on people. In March, he finally worked up the courage to ask her to have dinner with his family at the ranch. His mother had been pestering him about it for weeks, ever since she heard the full story of the rescue, and Quinn knew she was curious to meet the woman who had so obviously captured her son's attention. Hannah accepted immediately, and the following Sunday, Quinn drove her out to the Sawyer ranch in his father's best buggy. The ranch house was built of adobe and timber, sprawling and practical, with a wide porch that faced the mountains. His mother, Margaret, came out to greet them, wiping her hands on her apron, and Quinn saw her eyes widen slightly when she got a good look at Hannah. "So you are the young lady who caused such excitement," Margaret said, taking Hannah's hands in both of hers. We are so glad you are all right, my dear, and so proud of our Quinn for having the sense and courage to go after you." The dinner was a success. Hannah charmed both of Quinn's parents with her wit and her willingness to help in the kitchen, despite Margaret's protests. Quinn's younger sister, Rebecca, who was 17 and full of romantic notions, peppered Hannah with questions about Philadelphia and what it was like to travel west on the train. His father was quieter, watching and assessing, but Quinn saw the approval in his eyes. After dinner, Quinn took Hannah on a walk around the property, showing her the barn and the corrals where they kept the horses. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and the air was crisp, but no longer bitter with winter cold. "Your family is wonderful," Hannah said, watching a mare and her foal in one of the paddocks. "You are very lucky." "I know." Quinn leaned against the fence rail beside her. "My father built all this from nothing. When he came here, this was just empty land. Now we have the ranch and a good life and a place in the community. He taught me that if you work hard and treat people fairly, you can build something that lasts." "Is that what you want?" Hannah asked, looking at him. "To take over the ranch someday, to build on what your father started?" "I always thought so," Quinn said slowly. "But lately I have been wondering if maybe I want something more, or something different, not instead of the ranch, but alongside it." "Like what?" He turned to face her fully, his heart pounding. "Like a wife, a family of my own. Someone to share it all with." Hannah's breath caught, and in the fading light her eyes shone. "Quinn, I know I should court you properly," he said in a rush. "Take more time, do this the right way, but I also know that life is short and uncertain. I learned that in the war, and you learned it in that storm, and I do not want to waste time pretending I do not feel what I feel." "What do you feel?" she whispered. "I love you," Quinn said, the words both terrifying and liberating. "I have loved you since I saw you fighting to stay alive in that blizzard, since I held you in my arms and promised you would be safe. And every day since then, I have loved you more." Hannah reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle on his cheek. "I love you too," she said. "I think I started falling for you the moment I opened my eyes and saw you there in the snow, like an answer to a prayer I had not even known to say." He kissed her then, soft and careful at first, then deeper as she responded. The world around them faded away until there was only the two of them, only this moment, only this perfect rightness of finding each other. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Hannah laughed. "Your mother is probably watching from the kitchen window." "Almost certainly," Quinn agreed, grinning. "She has been waiting for me to settle down for years." "And have you settled down?" "Not yet," he said, "but I would like to with you if you will have me." Hannah's smile was radiant. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will." They were married in June, in the Presbyterian church that was still meeting in the schoolhouse. Hannah wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Martinez had helped her sew, with wildflowers from the mountain meadows in her hair. Quinn wore his best suit, the one he had bought for his cousin's wedding 3 years ago, and tried not to shake as he stood at the front of the room waiting for his bride. When Hannah walked down the aisle on the arm of Doc Wilson, who had offered to give her away since her own father had not made the journey from Philadelphia, Quinn felt his throat tighten with emotion. She was so beautiful, so full of life and promise, and she had chosen him. Out of all the possibilities in the world, she had chosen to build her life here with him in this wild and sometimes dangerous place. The ceremony was simple, but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to stand by each other through whatever storms life brought, literal or metaphorical. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed Hannah with all the love and hope in his heart, and the small gathering of townspeople cheered. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up under the cottonwood trees and food and drink contributed by half the town. There was music and dancing, and Quinn waltzed with his new wife under the summer stars, feeling like the luckiest man alive. "Are you happy?" he asked her as they swayed to the fiddle music. "Happier than I ever imagined being," Hannah said, her head resting on his shoulder. "When I left Philadelphia, I thought I was leaving to escape pain. But I was really traveling toward this, toward you, toward home." They spent their first months of marriage in a small cabin on the ranch property that Quinn had fixed up in the weeks before the wedding. It had 2 rooms and a porch, and Hannah made it into a home with curtains and rugs and the small touches that turned a house into something more. She continued teaching at the school, riding out each morning in the wagon Quinn had bought for her, and he worked the ranch with his father, learning the business side of things in preparation for the day when it would be his responsibility. Life fell into a rhythm that was both comfortable and exciting. Quinn loved coming home at the end of a long day to find Hannah preparing dinner, loved the way she would light up when she saw him, loved the talks they had late into the night about their dreams and plans and hopes for the future. She told him stories from her classroom, about the progress her students were making and the challenges she faced. He told her about the cattle and the horses, about the land and the weather, and the 1,000 small decisions that went into running a ranch. In the evenings, Hannah would sometimes read aloud to him from the books she loved, and Quinn found himself drawn into worlds he had never imagined. They talked about what they read, and Hannah never made him feel stupid or ignorant when he did not understand something. Instead, she would explain and discuss, treating his opinions as valuable as any scholar's. That first winter of their marriage was mild compared to the one that had nearly killed Hannah, but there were still storms that would blow in from the mountains and trap them inside for days at a time. Quinn found he did not mind. Being snowed in with Hannah was a joy, not a hardship. They would keep the fire burning high and cook together and make love and talk, and Quinn thought he had never been more content. In February, almost exactly a year after he had found her in the blizzard, Hannah told him she was pregnant. Quinn stared at her for a long moment, his mind trying to process the information, and then he let out a whoop of joy that probably scared the horses in the barn. He picked her up and spun her around, and she laughed and clung to him, her own joy matching his. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if repetition would make the miracle more real. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Hannah asked, though the answer was obvious from his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Quinn said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "You have made my life better in every possible way, and now this. A child, our child." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Hannah continued teaching until the school year ended in May, then devoted herself to preparing for the baby's arrival. Margaret came over often to help, bringing baby clothes she had saved from when her own children were small, offering advice and support. The women of Fort Garland threw Hannah a party, showering her with gifts and their own wisdom about childbirth and motherhood. Quinn found himself building a cradle in his spare time, working the wood with care and attention, wanting everything to be perfect for his son or daughter. He painted the nursery corner of their cabin a soft yellow and helped Hannah hang curtains printed with tiny flowers. They talked endlessly about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the future they were building together. In September, on a clear autumn day when the aspens on the mountains were just starting to turn gold, Hannah went into labor. Quinn stayed by her side through the long hours, holding her hand and wiping her brow and feeling utterly helpless in the face of her pain. Doc Wilson was there, calm and capable, and Margaret assisted him, talking Hannah through each contraction. Finally, as the sun was setting and painting the room in amber light, their son was born. He came into the world howling, red-faced and furious, and Quinn felt tears streaming down his face as he looked at this tiny, perfect human they had created. "A boy," Doc Wilson said, handing the baby to Hannah. "A healthy, strong boy." Hannah cradled their son against her chest, her face exhausted and radiant. "Look at him, Quinn. Look what we made." Quinn sat on the edge of the bed and put his arm around his wife, looking down at their child. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes, his tiny fists waving in the air. Quinn touched one of those fists with his finger, and the baby's hand closed around it with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Quinn whispered. "You are both perfect." They named him James, after Quinn's father, with a middle name of Thomas after Hannah's late father. Little Jamie, as they quickly started calling him, was a good baby, sleeping and eating and growing the way babies were supposed to. Quinn had worried that he would not know how to be a father, that he would somehow fail at this crucial task, but he found that love made it easier. Every time he looked at his son, he felt such a surge of protective devotion that it almost overwhelmed him. Hannah proved to be a natural mother, patient and attentive, but also practical. She had decided not to return to teaching for the time being, wanting to focus on their son, but she kept her hand in by tutoring a few of the older students who needed extra help. Quinn loved watching her with Jamie, the gentle way she would rock him and sing to him, the fierce love in her eyes. As Jamie grew from infant to toddler, the little cabin began to feel cramped. Quinn's father offered them a piece of land on the far side of the ranch, and Quinn accepted gratefully. Through the winter and spring of 1881, he and his father and several hired men built a proper house, with 3 bedrooms and a real kitchen and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. It was not fancy, but it was solid and well-made, a place where a family could grow. They moved in that summer, and Hannah spent weeks making it their own, arranging furniture and hanging pictures and planting a garden. Quinn built her a chicken coop and a small greenhouse where she could start seedlings early in the spring. Jamie toddled around the house and yard, getting into everything, and Quinn could not remember ever being this happy. The ranch was doing well. Quinn had taken over most of the day-to-day operations, and his father had stepped back, content to offer advice and help when needed, but no longer bearing the weight of every decision. Quinn had proven himself a capable manager, and the ranch hands respected him. He had ideas for expansion, for trying new breeding stock, for diversifying beyond just cattle. Hannah supported all of it, offering her own insights and helping him work through the complex calculations of profit and loss. In 1882, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was less surprising but no less joyful. Jamie was 3 years old now, full of energy and questions, and the idea of giving him a sibling delighted both Quinn and Hannah. This pregnancy was harder than the first. Hannah was sick more often, and by the time summer arrived, she was exhausted and uncomfortable. Quinn worried constantly, but Doc Wilson assured him that everything was progressing normally, that some pregnancies were just more difficult than others. In October, their daughter was born. Unlike Jamie's dramatic entrance, she arrived quietly in the early morning hours, a tiny delicate creature with wisps of dark hair and her mother's brown eyes. They named her Rose Margaret, after the wild roses that grew in the mountain meadows and after Quinn's mother. Jamie was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to hold her and help care for her. Hannah patiently taught him how to be gentle, how to support her head, how to talk softly around her. Quinn watched his family grow and felt such gratitude that sometimes it hurt. He had not known, 5 years ago when he went out into that blizzard, that he was tracking down his entire future. But that was exactly what he had done. The years passed in a blur of work and family and simple daily joys. Jamie started school when he was 6, walking to the schoolhouse with his mother, who had returned to teaching part-time. Rose grew into a bright, sweet child who followed her older brother everywhere and adored her father with an intensity that made Quinn's heart melt. In 1885, Hannah told Quinn she wanted to write a book. She had been thinking about it for years, she said, a book about the frontier for children, telling stories that would help them understand and appreciate the place they lived. Quinn encouraged her, setting up a desk in the corner of their bedroom where she could work in the evenings after the children were asleep. The book took her 2 years to write, working in stolen moments between teaching and mothering and all the other demands on her time. When she finally finished it, she sent the manuscript to a publisher in New York. Quinn watched her pack it up with shaking hands, saw the hope and fear in her eyes, and prayed that someone would recognize the value in what she had created. 4 months later, a letter arrived offering to publish the book. Hannah screamed when she read it, then burst into tears, and Quinn held her while she laughed and cried at the same time. Her book would be published. Her words would be read by children across the country. It was a dream she had not even fully articulated, and it was coming true. The book came out in 1888, with illustrations by an artist in New York, and it sold well enough that the publisher asked for another. Hannah wrote 3 more books over the next several years, each one building on the success of the last. She never became famous, but she had steady readers, and she received letters from children and parents thanking her for her stories. Quinn was so proud of her he could barely stand it. His wife, the woman he had rescued from a blizzard, had become an author. She had built a career alongside building a family, and she had done it with grace and determination. In 1890, Hannah became pregnant again unexpectedly. They had thought their family was complete with Jamie and Rose, both of whom were growing into fine young people. But life had other plans. At 34, Hannah faced this pregnancy with a mixture of joy and trepidation. She was older now, and this would likely be their last child. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. Hannah was sick constantly, and by her 6th month, Doc Wilson had ordered her to bed rest. Quinn took over more of the household duties with help from his mother and sister, and did his best to keep Hannah's spirits up. She hated being confined, hated feeling useless, but she followed the doctor's orders because she wanted this baby to survive. In March of 1891, their 2nd son was born. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Quinn feared he might lose both Hannah and the baby. But Doc Wilson knew his business and Margaret was there to help, and finally, after hours that felt like years, the baby arrived. He was smaller than Jamie had been, but his lungs were strong and his cries filled the house with life. They named him Henry Thomas, and he quickly became the darling of the family. Jamie, now 13 and already helping his father on the ranch, was protective of his baby brother. Rose, at 9, appointed herself his caretaker, always wanting to hold him and sing to him. And Hannah, exhausted but triumphant, held her youngest son and told Quinn that their family was finally complete. 3 children, she said, looking around at their family. "Can you believe we have 3 children?" "I can barely believe I have you," Quinn said, kissing her forehead. Everything else is just extra blessing. The 1890s brought changes to Fort Garland and to the Sawyer Ranch. The railroad came through, making it easier to ship cattle to market and bringing more people to the area. The town grew, adding new businesses and new faces. The silver mine played out, but new opportunities arose in timber and agriculture. Quinn expanded the ranch, buying additional land when neighboring properties went up for sale, and the operation grew to over 2,000 head of cattle. Jamie showed a natural aptitude for ranching, and Quinn began training him in earnest, teaching him everything his own father had taught him. Rose was more interested in books and learning, and Quinn and Hannah encouraged her, knowing that the world was changing and that women were finding new opportunities. They sent her to a girls' school in Denver when she was 15, and she thrived there, eventually deciding she wanted to become a teacher like her mother. Henry was the wild one, always getting into scrapes, always pushing boundaries. He kept Quinn and Hannah on their toes, but he was also affectionate and loyal, and they loved his fierce spirit even when it caused them worry. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Quinn looked around at everything he and Hannah had built and felt overwhelming gratitude. They had been married for almost 24 years. Their children were grown or nearly so. The ranch was prosperous. Hannah's books continued to sell. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and personal losses. His father had died in 1897, peacefully in his sleep, and Quinn had taken over the ranch completely. His mother lived in town now, near Rebecca and her family, but she came out to visit often. Through it all, Quinn and Hannah had remained partners, lovers, best friends. They still talked late into the night, still made each other laugh, still reached for each other in the darkness. The passion of their early days had matured into something deeper and more lasting, a love built on shared experiences and mutual respect and the simple joy of being together. One evening in June, on their 24th anniversary, Quinn took Hannah up to a meadow high in the mountains, a place he had found years ago and kept as a secret spot. They rode up on horseback, carrying a picnic supper, and spread a blanket on the grass. Below them, the valley stretched out in shades of green and gold, and the ranch buildings were tiny dots in the distance. "You remember the night I found you in the storm?" Quinn asked, handing Hannah a glass of wine from the bottle he had brought. "Of course," she said, leaning against him. "How could I forget? That was the night that changed everything." "I think about it sometimes," Quinn said. "About what would have happened if I had not gone out, or if I had not found you in time, or if 100 other things had gone differently. And it terrifies me, Hannah. The thought of a world where you are not in it, where we did not find each other." "But we did," Hannah said, taking his hand. "Against all odds, in the middle of a blizzard on the wildest frontier, we found each other, and we built this beautiful life." "We did," Quinn agreed. "And I would do it all again. Every hard winter, every difficult decision, every moment of fear and uncertainty. I would do it all again for the chance to spend my life with you." Hannah turned to face him, her eyes shining with tears. "You saved my life that night, Quinn. But you have been saving it every day since then, just by being you, by loving me the way you do, by building this life with me." They sat on the mountainside as the sun set, painting the sky in impossible colors, and talked about their life together. They remembered the early days in the little cabin, the excitement and nervousness of becoming parents for the first time, the struggles and triumphs of building the ranch. They talked about their children, about the people they were becoming, about the hopes and dreams they had for them. "I want to grow old with you," Hannah said as the stars began to appear overhead. "I want 50 more years of this, of us. We will do our best," Quinn said, kissing her. "Though we might not have 50 years, we will make the most of whatever time we get." They rode back down the mountain in the twilight, and Quinn thought about the younger version of himself who had ridden out into a blizzard 22 years ago, determined to save a stranger. That young man could never have imagined all of this, all that would come from that one decision. But he had followed his instincts, had done what he knew was right, and it had led him to everything that mattered. The years continued to roll by with their mixture of joy and sorrow, challenge and reward. Rose graduated from the Teachers College and got a position at a school in Colorado Springs. Jamie married a girl from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on Sawyer land and started their own family. Henry, true to his restless nature, went off to seek his fortune in the oil fields of Texas, though he came home to visit regularly and always said he would return to the ranch someday. Quinn and Hannah became grandparents, and Quinn discovered that holding his grandchildren brought a joy that was different from but equal to holding his own children. He watched Hannah with the babies and saw the same tender care she had shown their own children, and he fell in love with her all over again. In 1905, the town of Fort Garland threw a celebration for the 50th anniversary of the fort's founding, even though the military had abandoned the post years earlier. Quinn and Hannah attended, now in their late 50s, but still active and engaged in community life. As they walked through the town together, people greeted them warmly, treating them as the pillars of the community they had become. "You ever miss Philadelphia?" Quinn asked Hannah as they walked home that evening, their hands linked. Hannah laughed. "Not even for a moment. That city was never my home. This is my home. This place, these people, this has always been where I was meant to be. Even though it almost killed you, especially because of that," Hannah said. "That storm brought me to you. It forced me to face my own mortality and decide what I really wanted from life. And what I wanted was this: adventure and love and a partner who would ride into a blizzard to save me." They reached their house, the one Quinn had built with his own hands all those years ago, and sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The ranch spread out around them, a testament to hard work and careful stewardship. Their children and grandchildren were healthy and happy. Hannah's books lined a shelf in the parlor, a legacy of words and stories. It was a good life, an improbable life, a life neither of them could have imagined when they started. "I love you," Quinn said, the words as true as they had been the first time he spoke them. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I love you," Hannah said, resting her head on his shoulder. "My rescuer, my partner, my home." As the stars came out one by one, they sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last long after they were gone. The wind whispered through the cottonwood trees, carrying the scent of sage and wild roses, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon. Their story had begun with a storm and a desperate search through blinding snow. It had continued through years of love and labor, of children raised and dreams pursued, of a life built together one day at a time. And it would end, as all stories must, but not yet. Not for a long time yet. For now, there was just this moment, this perfect evening, this love that had survived everything the world could throw at it. Quinn thought about the young woman he had found half frozen in the wilderness, the woman who had fought to survive even when hope seemed lost. He thought about the courage it had taken for her to leave everything she knew and come west, to start over in a place that was dangerous and unforgiving. And he thought about his own courage, the kind that had sent him out into a killer storm to save a stranger. But she had never been a stranger, not really. From the first moment he saw her fighting against the snow, she had been his destiny, his future, the other half of himself he had not known was missing. Finding her had not just saved her life, it had given him a life worth living. The years ahead would bring their share of challenges. There would be more losses, more changes, the inevitable march of time that no one could escape. But whatever came, they would face it together as they had faced everything else. That was the promise they had made to each other on a cold February night in a mountain cabin. And it was a promise they had kept every day since. As they finally rose to go inside, Quinn took one last look at the land around them, at the home they had made, at the legacy they were leaving for their children and grandchildren. It was not a perfect life, but it was a good one, an honest one, a life lived with purpose and passion and abiding love. And it all started because he had refused to let a stranger die in the snow, because he had tracked her through a blizzard and brought her home. Because sometimes, if you are very lucky and very brave, the person you save turns out to be the person who saves you right back. That was the real miracle, Quinn thought as he followed Hannah inside. Not that he had found her in that vast white wilderness, but that she had found him too, and together they had created something that neither could have built alone. The door closed behind them, shutting out the night, and inside the house was warm and full of light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but tonight there was just this, just home, just love, just the two of them still together after all these years, still grateful for the storm that had brought them together and the life they had built in its aftermath. And that, Quinn thought as he took his wife's hand and led her toward their bedroom, was more than enough. It was everything.